big story in our industry the past couple weeks has been what was said and how do you take action coming out of the NACS State of the Industry Summit, which took place earlier in April. We talked in previous episodes about some of the big trends that we heard on stage. We listened to one of the speakers, Steve Lurch, who was absolutely fantastic in talking about how to change your mindset and focus more on using AI. Today, we're going to talk to the guy who was the brains behind all the numbers that you saw on stage. Joining us for our conversation today is Chris Rapanick. He has been the guy behind the SOI. I didn't realize that was a rhyme, but it is.
Nice.
The guy behind the SOI for, 15 years now?
Yeah. I've been with NACS for just at 16 over the weekend, and I've been managing the SOI enterprise for since 2016 or so, when Bob Swanson, the person that did it for 26 years before me, retired.
Well, congratulations on your anniversary and in a very smooth handoff in something that is now 50 years plus old in terms of measuring not just the health of the industry, but the health of businesses within the industry, particularly how they benchmark against each other. And not just am I performing well, but why am I performing well, or how can I perform a little better? So let's just start out big picture. There's inside the store, there's the forecourt, there's all kinds of other areas, but let's just start inside the store. What did you see as some of the big stories that emerged in looking at the metrics of what took place in 2024?
So a couple things for sure. Fuel pricing is still impacting the sales mix in the channel a lot more than I think what most people would expect. But we've shown a considerable decline in the past 2 years in fuel sales based on price alone. So, gallons are essentially flat, prices down, almost 6%. So that's basically what fuel sales look like. And, this is one of the things that, Varish from Loop talked about on the stage is like, we still look at this in terms of our business, and how it's affected by fuel, and we just live with it or whatever. And, it's something that it's always been. But, as margins have gotten larger, obviously it's become a more critical piece, especially to, folks that don't have that inside offer. So that's kind of the first piece is, things are still driven by, fuel. And that causes the sales mix to change, especially when price goes up. Good news on the inside, though, is that inside transactions specifically, were up again. And they've been in decline over the past couple of years. So we think that there's, traffic growth for sure. So that's exciting. Food service had a better year this year in 2024 than merchandise. And that's something that we think is positive news too. We would have loved to have seen merchandise up, 2.5% also. But at the end of the day, the piece of the food service thing is pretty important. So certainly, things are good there. On the other side of, inside sales, there's still an impact of inflation. And every time you think it's going to kind of go away, it, spikes back up to 4% or whatever, the CPI. And, we've done this a couple of years now, looking at those inside sales, adjusted for inflation, and there's no growth there, honestly, at all. So less than flat for merchandise in terms of actual dollar sales. And if you're at the summit or, you deal with some other syndicated services, we use NIQ specifically, and every category in convenience is down in units, every one of them. So we know that there's still some pricing there. But, again, it's managing through tough times, which is really what makes convenience what it is, because there's always something going on, and we always seem to be able to pull through as an industry, which is pretty exciting, I believe.
So one of the big things that you touched upon was trips were up. And that has been a big discussion over the last few years. How do we get trips up? Was there anything in particular that you thought was behind the increase of trips and with merchandise sales flat, if you will, down in some cases, flat in others? What drove more trips? Was it more times going to the gas to buy gas and then go inside the store? smaller snacks, smaller basket? What was bringing this increase in trips, which is awesome news?
For sure, for sure. So definitely not, more folks coming from the pump. Pump transactions were actually down in 24, and that's, basic math too. Fuel price goes down, you get more every time you go and spend the same $30 or whatever, which we've talked about that before. But what the retailers told us about transaction counts increasing, um, first off, people are buying less. So we were seeing this huge, basket value growth over the course of, post COVID. I still say that. I wish I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, the basket, went from $6 to 8 and change. And that's slowed. So basically, basket growth is flat now. So people going more often, spending about the same. So they're getting less stuff when they go is basically how it looks. And knowing, that particular candy bar that you like that used to be, $1.99 is now $2.99 or whatever that number is.
Mm-hmm.
People are noticing that, and I think that they're going to the store, less frequently because of that. I also think too, and we talked a little bit about trends in the TD Link census this year. There were a lot of small operators that are no longer listed as open. So they could have been sold that particular day, or maybe they reopened in since. But long story short, I believe that the quality of the fleet of convenience stores, if you will, has gotten better. So, all the ones, especially ones that are building, a Wawa or a Sheetz or a QT Quick Trip or a KT Quick Trip. Mm-hmm. Those guys, generally build nicer, better, bigger stores that people like to shop in. So I believe, that's part of it too, that maybe some of those old kind of toss-offs, from M&A, people aren't buying them anymore. Mm-hmm. So that's my spin on things. And you can take that to the bank and get like 37 cents for it. But I think that's what people are saying, and it's true in the data as well.
And you hit upon some things with like the inflation of center store items. There was a discussion about salty snacks and candy in particular. Both, I think, were up 30 some percent over the last couple of years. So people are looking for value, and it does give our channel an opportunity. Of course, there's a threat there because a lot of people sell the same snacks that we sell. Like pretty much anybody in retail sells the same snacks and drinks that we sell. So why do they come to the convenience store? You want to give them a reason. Increasingly, that reason can be tied to food service, which we have seen is just accelerating its percentage of in-store sales and percent of in-store profits. So you're increasingly talking to retailers who say, I do food service, and oh, by the way, have merchandise as well, as opposed to I'm experimenting with food service. It's a food forward business increasingly. Doesn't mean that everybody that comes inside the store is going to buy the food service that time, but more and more are, and it does allow us to differentiate from the competition that is selling some of those center store items.
For sure, totally agree. And, I think the food service piece is, we put a serious focus on it at the summit this year. And, I think that probably you heard, two stories. Like, first story, I've actually decided to make this move. This is where I'm at. I'm going to made to order, moving away from commissary or whatever. And then the other one is like, wow, I just saw food service waste on average is $2,000 per store per month. That's a lot to throw away. Mm-hmm. So there's still, the kind of that edge, and I think that, VARS did a pretty good job of, presenting the opportunity to people, to retailers in general. It's like, hey, if you feel like that you can't do food, do a car wash or do, check cashing or something like that you can still kind of earn those gross profit dollars. Because at the end of the day, honestly, expenses are still growing. I think we're at 4% so far this year, which, tacked on to 5 last year and 10 the year before and 10 the year before. All those things, I don't believe expenses are ever going to go down. Mm-hmm. So you have to be able to, manage your business to the fact that, ultimately it would be great for a retailer just to pay all their bills with what goes on inside. And, fuel is the extra. But if not, you would probably need to be thinking about some business model that gets you gross profits, whether it's EV charging, a post office, a UPS, or whatever people do, and it's important that I think that people need to be thinking that way.
And it's important. It doesn't have to be food service, but whatever it is, it has to be something you're committed to being really good at
100%.
and really care about. It can't be like, hey, we're just going to do this because I was at a meeting and everybody said this is a growth category.
Yes.
It is something that find your niche and then just build around that and continue to drive excellence.
Sure.
And that's where the profit dollars come from.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. And, kind of looking at it from another standpoint as well, there are people that are blazing this trail already. There are people that have learned and made the mistakes already, and they've got, a good food service program behind them because of it. And these are the people that come to the SOI Summit to share, right? They come with best practices and, obviously not for competitive purposes or whatever, but if you have a really good food service provider that's on the East Coast and you're in our central region out there in wherever, Iowa, wherever you may be, people work together here, to say, well, hey, I tried X, Y, or Z. I realize, that waste is really high in your region or whatever. Here's some ways that you may be able to, to kind of quell that. I mean, this is the coolest thing ever is that, if people say, or people said 20 years ago, I'm going to have a great food program in 20 years, maybe people would have laughed, but, the model's been proven. And I think that people are probably more accepting of food in a convenience store than they were certainly 5 or 10 years ago.
So while we present numbers that say this is what the average store is about, and it's showing that food service is the way to success, there is no average convenience store, or maybe
Not
there
yet.
is somewhere out there. But the way that your team looks at the information, you look at by decile, which is how the each tenth of the bigger universe, how do they perform based on profits? What did they do differently?
Right.
You also slice it by region. So you're looking at, you had mentioned Northeast is food centric.
Absolutely.
Not necessarily the case in other regions. So you present in breakouts and throughout the presentations, hey, here's different ways to look at things, because you don't want to compare yourself to average. You want to compare yourself to what is possible. Do you want to? Was there anything that you saw related to in the deciles? There was an awful lot. They tended to be the top decile tended to do more around food, but not everybody in the top decile was about food.
Yeah.
Were there any surprises within the deciles? And also related to that, were there any learnings by region that you think are important for people to pay attention to? So let's start with the deciles.
Sure. There was actually something that was super cool this year in the deciles, as a matter of fact. So generally, it's just like you said, if we are looking at deciles, especially without the fuel component, we see that the main characteristic is either number one, you have a crazy busy food service program / merchandise, which they usually go together, or you are such a low cost operator that you could do a marginal business on the inside, but you're not paying your people anything. All of your monthly bills are relatively low, whatever. So you can be, a top decile company that way too. It's hard when you look at, food service sales in a month are $160,000 on average or something like that, which is, you've been here longer than I have. It's outlandish to even think that we're anywhere close to that. So, but then on the other hand, this year, top or the bottom decile usually strikes us as, someone who's not trying very hard, right? Maybe their store is dirty or it's small or they don't have food service or whatever those things are. The bottom decile featured companies this year that do a really good job. They sell a lot of fuel. So when we take out, that fuel component, there's some profit there, but not a lot. So the funny thing is, and this has never happened before, the bottom decile average transactions on the inside, no less, were higher than the top decile. Now, basket was about $2 or something, and the top decile was $9. So, there's a big difference there. This never happened. So really what you have is some chains with super busy stores. They just haven't gotten the food service piece yet. Merchandise sales were good, but you pull fuel 43 cents, cents per gallon. That's a lot of GP that you take. So yeah, that was the most amazing thing, and it's never happened before. And yeah, by the way, I'm a nerd. I get excited over that. So it was like, I want to reach for the stars now because this has happened. So that's first thing. And then the second thing is that the central region is growing quickly. So my colleague Jenna Collar did the regional presentation for that, and I was just looking through her slides or whatever. Everything is growing in the central region, and Montana, Idaho, all those places that people want to move all of a sudden. But it shows in the data, and there's nothing more exciting than that when people are moving from an urban area to Montana or whatever, and you see the changes in the data. I get super stoked over it, but you know that already. So yeah, so that's the thing. Central's hot, and the top decile wasn't like just annihilating the smaller companies this year. There were some really good companies that just do a lot of fuel.
So it's very important to state that the submissions for the state of the industry are confidential.
100%.
We don't know who they are. So anytime you or I reference a company, that doesn't necessarily say that we know they're in there or what they did or something like that, because I certainly don't. But when you talk about the central region, some of these stores come to mind, and what you're seeing right now in Idaho with a lot of really good companies,
good operators, yes.
And yeah, there's some population centers, but then there's a lot that isn't. So you're seeing real growth, I think, outside of those population areas with high quality stores that are
for sure.
They're not the, hey, we're the only competition in town. They're building stores that look just as good as the ones that have the intense competition in a major market.
And what's just as interesting, I believe, is that there were some established operators, especially in Idaho or whatever those states are, and you can see that they're reinvesting too. So when you go to Idaho in 2023 and you see some of their sites, and then you go back in 2024 and they're remodeled and fresh and new. I mean, this is what NACS's statement is you take whatever extra GP dollars you have at the end of the month and you sock it away so you can remodel your store on a regular basis or whatever. This is what we tell people, and it's cool to see chains that have been in business at least since I've been working here, so 16 years ago. They're really reinvesting back in the business. I think it's pretty cool.
And also, no matter where you are, if it's a more sparse area or not, you do have competition because, as we talked about earlier, everybody is competing for that convenience customer.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to be convenient. They may not be, and then everybody's competing against the internet. And the biggest competition is somebody just never leaving their home, which is partially the internet or partially just like, I'm not going to buy anything. So I think that's probably also driving the increase in central and some of these other areas where the competition with either not buying anything or the internet means that you have to up your game in these markets.
100%. And, some of our familiar, member companies are moving into new states. Like every day you see, so-and-so is moving into Ohio or moving into Kansas or Kentucky or whatever. You see it every day. And, again, I think that it's good for the industry to have nicer units where people, feel safe and comfortable to shop. But I also think that one of the coolest thing about this industry is that it's still very entrepreneurial. You can go open up a convenience chain if you have some capital relatively easily. So yeah, I mean, it's amazing. But yeah, you're totally right. The growth in those areas is just crazy.
Now, one of the things we've heard from some of the fastest growing companies, and the ones that are growing by building their own stores as opposed to acquiring stores, I've heard from a couple of them. They have said, we owe it to our employees to build more stores because we have more people who are qualified to be a store manager than we have stores. So it is our obligation to build more stores and give these really talented people the ability to run them 100%. And run an amazing business. Now, of course, you don't want to be in competition with these groups that are coming into your area. But since we're talking about people, and that was also a focus of the summit. Was there anything related to metrics on labor or performance that you thought are worth talking about?
Yeah, for sure. So it's probably been certainly since pre-pandemic that the industry has been 130, 135% turnover for employees. That decreased by almost 13 points this year. That's a sizable, you're looking at almost a 10% decrease, which is pretty exciting. And manager turnover, I don't know the number offhand, but there was a good decline as well. So it's been no secret that this industry has been, spending a lot of money to either increase salaries or to provide, tenure bonuses or whatever to folks that stick around. And so I would say it's begun to work, right? So things have settled out. Things are a little tighter than they had been in terms of labor market, right? So it's harder for someone to go choose and find a job that's not convenience related. So I think a couple things. People are staying around longer. They seem to be more productive. In-store gross profit dollars per transaction increased. So you like to assume that, folks have been around longer. They've got tenure. They've learned how to do the job better. So that would be the hope. And then, on the other side, there is some proof in the pudding that maybe, some of these, salary bonuses and things like that have actually worked. So, and generally, if you look, I don't think we had this slide this year in the summit, but the convenience wages and benefit line is like a 45 degree, and retail in general is more like a 20. So there's a huge difference in the effort that we put in terms of investment to get and keep good people.
And it will be interesting to track how reduced turnover, assuming it stays, may lead to an increase in trips. So if people know who they're buying items from, even if they're buying fewer items, they're going to want to go to the place where they can have that conversation, have that smile, that something's familiar, as opposed to I can get this anywhere. So
for sure,
that may play out in somewhat uncertain times that we live in now, where are we going to face an economic downturn? Are we not? So remains to be seen. And I know it's early in the year, and I know it's early in the looking at data. So I don't want to even suggest that the data can be looked at with all the recent uncertainty. But let me ask the question a little differently. Are there some things that you and team are paying attention to in particular this year to see how our industry addresses or manages uncertain times, and where the customer is feeling and how the customer is spending money?
Yeah, for sure. So, we have our regular things. We're always going to be on top of inside transactions specifically. We like to look at transactions in total and at the pump too. But inside is really what we track heavily. So certainly that. We're seeing, gallons coming up, a couple points again this year, which is good for, the retailers. Obviously, there's things that are changing in the environment, which is probably going to cause this to spike at some point. So that's good. And then food service business, of course, NACS has been super involved in, the loss prevention efforts of the industry.
Making people feel safe.
Right. So we want people to feel safe. So we watch, and everyone asks for merchandise shrink. Yeah, no one used to ask. And when I say no one, I mean no one. And now it's what everyone says. Well, what's my shrink percentage? So certainly something there. And then just expenses as a whole, I think, it's Varsh said it best on the stage. It's super easy to increase expenses, right? So it's super easy to spend more, but it's hard to make more. So if you control the spend part, you're probably in pretty good shape with the making part, I think. So, yeah. But yeah, no, certainly those things are what we're always on all the time.
Well, that's probably the best quote to end this on. But
that's a good one. It wasn't mine. Totally stolen.
Yeah.
Thank you, Varish. Appreciate you.
Yes. So keep on saying those smart things, Varish, so we can repeat them. But there's a couple of touch points that are coming along. We had the SOI Summit earlier in April, but the summit report of all the data from 2024 will be available in June, I believe.
Yes.
You guys are furiously writing that,
Yes,
just
we
as
are
the
writing,
NACS
yeah.
Magazine team is furiously writing and editing copy
Yep.
for the June issue that will also cover the summit and what was discussed on stage. So there are a lot of deliverables that will be out in the market for people to take a look at. And for people who also want to see how they can learn more about data, whatever opportunities there are, what's the best way for them to learn more?
So the first thing that you have to do is benchmark something, right? So you have your own company's performance results. You have to find a benchmark that you can access regularly and that you can understand how to use. The easiest way to do that is to get an SOI report. It gives you multiple views. Jeff mentioned chain size, Jeff mentioned deciles, and all those other things. So it gives you tons of ways to look at the data. We do regions now, which we've only done for the last few years too. So there is something in that book for any retailer to go to benchmark against. And then from there, when you realize that you want to do it more frequently or maybe more in depth, or you want to spread your wings, that's when you call NACS and you say, I want to get involved in the CSX database. You do this SOI level benchmarking every month when people send their data in, every month of every year. And that's when you really start seeing the differences are made. So that's the path to success in benchmarking in this industry.
And then see how you measured up in April 2026 when the NACS SOI Summit is in Illinois. So
yes,
never too early to start planning for that. But Chris, your data probably, a lot of us at NACS couldn't do our jobs without the data that you and team provide. It allows us to look at what are the messages, whether it's talking to reporters or whether it's talking on Capitol Hill and state houses. So thanks for making this data so essential for our industry and individual companies to improve. And let's hopefully have many more years of good stories of people learning how to benchmark and how to get better. So thanks for joining.
We love the work. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you all for listening. Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.